mean a real journey. There's this bond of trust that seems to have formed in the human heart and allowed us to organize society. Oh man, it started, the Big East started along these 4 different rivers. There's the Tigris, Euphrates, there's Egypt and the Nile, there's the Indus in India, and there's the Yellow River in China. And what happened is people started just, it was good land there was lots of stuff, and people started realizing that plants that they were gathering had seeds. And they started planting them intentionally, and agriculture gave way to hunting and gathering. And this happened again with the domestication of the chicken. Wow, it's just amazing what's happened. This all started happening around 8,500, 9,000 before the Common Era. And then it grew. It grew. There was this huge agricultural revolution, and it occurred across the planet. And we're the product of that. You see, what happened is, as agriculture happened, people began to settle along these big rivers. And there were other settling places. You needed water, you needed place of fertile land, you needed a good climate, and that's what they found. And these settlements began to emerge. And eventually they gave way to towns, and they realized some people could make money or food through trade by being a potter because they were very good at it, or helping people build their huts and homes. And eventually these small towns that were trading centers and the beginning of these different kinds of trade, metalworking is another one, gave way to cities. And if you look at the word city and civil, they are related. You see, cities and civilization are really part of each other. Something happened. In that time, things became centralized. There was the domestication of not just plants, but animals. There's this specialty actions. That's where people gave way to different kinds of forms of trade, whether you're working with wood as a carpenter, or clay as a potter, or metal. You see, and this gave way to architecture and new kinds of farming, expansionism. It gave way to culture, because all of a sudden, if you're moving with the farming year, you have free time. There's a time for planting, there's a time for growing and harvesting, and then there's a time for sitting back and yee-hawing. And that gave way to an amazing thing. It gave way to a hierarchical social class. It gave way to mining, again, more trade, taxation. It gave way to becoming more densely populated, the emergence of art and science, ideologies of progress. It also gave ideas of security. We expected the government to keep us secure. They built that wall around Jericho, which, by the way, is seen as one of the earliest cities on the planet. They gave way to methods of measurement. Once you start trading, you want to get a fair deal, and you had to measure stuff. You see, it gives rise to a whole thing, and all of a sudden, monuments emerge. Instead of worshiping things in nature, all of a sudden there's gods and goddesses that oversee the farming, that oversee the climate, that oversee these things. And we begin to see the arts and transportation and language and medicine all begin to emerge. Worship happens. Potters, metalworking, masons, priesthood, governing class. Over and over we see this. And sometimes we don't see that we are inside an amazing blessing. And that blessing is called civilization. And so today I just want to celebrate civilization. I want to celebrate all that we have. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm still so thankful for indoor plumbing. I'm still on that train. The more history I learn of everything from our food to our toys to how civilization organizes itself, and it organizes itself through bonds of trust. What was it Will Durant said? Civilization begins with order, grows with liberty, and dies with chaos. And so here we are in an amazingly civilized human people. And one of the aspects of civilization is liberty, freedom to move around, freedom to say, I think I'd be a better potter than I would a farmer. Freedom to travel and to be maybe a tradesman, because all of a sudden this gave rise to merchant trains. We hear about the Silk Road and things like that, civilizations being connected. And now we're talking about a global civilization, and we've talked about that over and over here. So today I just want to celebrate this amazing event we're a part of, civilization. I just want to do a shout out to all those who came before and helped organize this around some very fragile bond of trust, which we're still seeing how fragile it is. So today we're just celebrating civilization. I'd like to welcome my cohorts, Bob Hayes and Marianne Rudis. Bob, what say you when it comes to civilization and this party that we can throw in celebration of it?
Well, you laid out one important aspect of civilization, and that's the artifacts that humans have built, the cities and the different techniques of growing and husbanding animals and so forth. But I think there's another aspect that maybe is more important today than ever before, and that's what we might term civilized behavior. And that's something that people...
Bob just froze up. So, Marianne, are you still with me?
I am, yes.
We'll hope to get Bob back. If I don't get him back in a second, we might have to take... Oh, wait a second, Bob. Hey, Bob, hold up. You froze up, so you got to...
Yeah, I'm here.
So go back to what you were saying.
I was saying that there's an important aspect of civilization which people define as civilized behavior. And that has been talked about for hundreds and hundreds of years. And I think that behavior that we term civilized has a lot of connotations that have really nothing to do with architecture and all of these other aspects of civilization, all of the artifacts. And that is what we've talked about as an increase in empathy. You mentioned it as trust that we have with each other. But that trust is gained by how we behave toward one another. And on my pessimistic side, I see that veneer of civilized behavior as being very, very thin these days. Maybe it always has been. And I think part of the goal of evolution is to thicken that veneer of civilization or civilized behavior.
And the piece in there that we can celebrate is that civilized behavior, which allows us to communicate across differences. People who are very different than us, but to be in relationship with them is to our advantage. Whether we're talking about silk or tea or medicines, or how to build a ship, any of those things. So I think that civilized piece is very important, and that's what I want to celebrate. I realize things are thin, and we can go into that place, but I want to try to keep us in a party mode. If it wasn't so early here, I'd have a drink, just because. Come on, man, this is an amazing thing. We take it so for granted. Marianne, civilization.
Well, I think, right there in that, the word is civil. And the whole idea that we live in community, to me, civilization is community. So we live in communities. We live in civilizations. We are dependent upon each other for things that, you used to be able to have like your tribe and all of your needs could be met right within there. Right now, the way the world is, it's very complex, and there are lots of moving parts. And we, like you said, we have to reach out across differences. But I think that what you were talking about, Bob, too, is that is very, very important, because we have to have agreed upon rules. And how do we agree upon those rules? A lot of it comes from those external pieces. It comes from the art that comes up. It comes from the stories that we tell. And that's what molds our civilization into. I think what we're seeing, what can happen is, you mentioned that civilization falls apart. It starts with order and goes through liberty and then chaos. And I think we're seeing a little bit of chaos right now within our civilizations, where things are breaking down a little bit. But so how do we bring us back to a shared understanding that our interdependence is a good thing, and that we are not in this alone, that we are together, and finding those stories or ways to have a common public square, I guess.
Yeah. And I want to interrupt, because I want to say how difficult it is for us to celebrate, because both of you are already talking about the chaos, the breakdown. And what I want to do is lift up those pieces that are to our advantage. Yeah, there's a lot going wrong. We've dealt with a whole lot of that in our podcast. This podcast going into this season, I want to talk about what's to celebrate, and I'll give you a couple fronts that we can do that on. Communication. I do believe that the internet is the hardwiring of the global brain, and transportation. We have allowed just about anybody to go anywhere.
Let me throw a third in.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
A third is leisure time. Civilization has given us the opportunity to think about things, to let our minds wander, to come up with new ideas, to come up with new things, which then feed back and help civilization move forward. But if we didn't have that leisure time, we would be spending it all scratching in the dirt and trying to get food. And
that's why agriculture and the climate and that rhythm was so important, because it afforded us a few things. One, it gave us a surplus, and that surplus meant we had to somehow keep track of the surplus, which came, that gave rise to the first languages, which had to do with measurement, bushels and weights, trying to create a common weight system. Those are elements of civilization that we take so for granted, and yet they were hard fought. They were, people spending time in their, after the harvest, you sat on a big pile of wheat and you go, well, man, I want to build a house and I want to do this and that. How do I create fair trade? How do I get what's my due for this grain? And, of course, the house builders, the metal workers, the potters, they're all doing it. So, amen to leisure time. And, again, I think that's why farming was so important. Go ahead, Marianne.
Well, in the bridge builders, I still marvel every time I cross a bridge, because someone had to do that first. And, solving problems, that's another piece of it, is when we figure out how to solve problems. And the whole idea of, we're moving away from survival to this place where when we have leisure time, when we have space, and I think that's something that we really, really were able to capitalize on last year, where we were able to kind of have more time to process, to think, to appreciate, what we have, and then move on from there. So, yeah.
And I think that's part, one of the things that I noticed in my study is this ideology of progress. There's an expectation built within civilization for the next piece. In the Renaissance, Western world rediscovered all the things that the Roman society, not all of them, but many things that the Roman society had come up with and had been lost. And because of the way the barbarians came in and all that stuff. But the civilization and the way that knowledge gets passed, the way that there is a built-in tendency for a better tomorrow. even in these ancient civilizations, we're seeing that they were exploring different ways of doing stuff all the time. Most of
You
them
know,
probably failed.
I just spent a little bit of time on a Navajo reservation and talking with a young man, and the way their traditions are passed down from generation to generation. When they introduce themselves, which I never knew this, when they introduce in their native language, they identify themselves as their mother, their father, and then they give their grandparents' names and the great-grandparents' names and where they came from and what tribe they were with. And it's this long string of an introduction of this is who I am and this is where I'm from. And that civilization then is brought forward even amongst the diminishing of the there's that core that is surviving and being born again. And so I think we're all experiencing, how do we keep our valid traditions, our valid knowledge, how do we keep that going forward amongst the destructive forces? And I know you don't want to go there, but they're all around us as well. And I think civilization is working within various forces, and it is emerging to the next level. So,
and like any other force, they're swinging from positive to negative. There's always this tension that's going on, and civilization is not a one track that has just moved forward without any bumps in the road. There's always been these swings back and forth.
Well, and it's all psychedelic gray. There's no black and white, and I think it's we get caught when we start dividing it up that way. So my view is those dark forces actually force us to consider things in a different way. And that's part of what civilization does. This whole concept of a ideology of progress interests me, maybe because I read a lot on Da Vinci and Jobs and Einstein and now the CRISPR gene. How is it these minds keep searching for the next piece? And I think that potters were doing that. I mean, I look at Egypt and the Great Pyramids. We don't think of the folks that were designing those losing sleep at night because they didn't really know if the damn thing's going to work or not. But it was all those little pieces that come together. I think of Thomas Crapper and the toilet and the whole way that happened, and the vacuum valve, or the loop at the bottom, which keeps the gases from coming up on every, whether it's a toilet or a sink or anything else. Little things like that they amaze me. And I'll be honest, another thing that amazes me, I've been watching the history of toys. Barbie, the woman, Ruth Handler, who invented her, everywhere she went, they said, "Are you nuts? You can't have a doll that has breasts." And, she all the dolls were there to incite domestication of a little girl taking care of a baby. They weren't about projecting one's life into the future, and that's what Barbie started doing. And when the women's revolution came, Ruth Handler was brilliant. She was a businesswoman in a world where she couldn't even get a credit card. She basically made 100 different Barbies. They were doctors and lawyers and every other thing. They were Asian, they were African. It's over and over. I just think of how brilliant that was, that she allowed the little girls' imaginations to project in different ways. I think that's what civilization does. It takes the next piece. And I'm not necessarily a pro-Barbies person, although I'm all for breasts on dolls, don't get me wrong. Especially ones you can dress like that. I mean, Ruth Handler went to the best dress designers in the world and had them designing clothes for Barbie. I mean, it's brilliant. And I try to transpose that back to 3,000 years ago and a potter or a metal worker who's working with brass, and just starting to understand how metal works, how temperature works, how getting it up high works, and how those small innovations spread so fast, not just for ornaments and art, but for weaponry and everything else. To me, that is an amazing aspect of civilization. And it's almost like once people got together, they gathered together and had to reconcile their differences in some way. They had to not maybe reconcile, but at least negotiate those differences. Something amazing began to happen. And I think it's still happening. And that's why I wanted to say celebrate, because I think it's just, again, the shots that we all got in our arms, the reason that happened in months instead of years was about the CRISPR gene. It was about scientists noticing how bacteria respond to a virus and going, well, we can do that. Over and over, civilization has this forward motion, and it's got some dark sides. I mean, once you get into weaponry and all that stuff, come on, man, our creativity is great, but finding new ways to kill each other is not to anybody's advantage in the long run. How we become and keep becoming a new people that is civil, and that as these new orders of complexity, and Marianne, you touched on this at the beginning, how those new orders of complexity get translated into stories and everydayness and meaningful ways for us to connect and also see our lives. All of us who've gotten the vaccine are part of the CRISPR revolution. And it's a civilization thing. I just babbled a whole lot, but I'm just so excited about civilization, and there's so much. I turn on the news, and it's a lot of dark stuff, but the fact is, man, the human being, we've come a long way, and we're still here, so what the hell?
Well, we have to keep hope alive, and optimism is a good thing. So.
Yeah, I think that again, what probably the most important thing that has advanced civilization is trade, and on the darker side, warfare. But trade is really the thing that has forced us to share with one another, with people who we don't share the same language even, or that we don't share the same geographic location. But it gets back to what it does for the individual, what rewards the individual in this civilization contract that we have. And that's another one of these balance things. If the individual isn't making money off a trade, he's not going to force himself through the rigors of the Silk Road. It comes back to what's in it for me, and how can I maximize my benefit without destroying the benefits that others are getting. And that's the essence of trade.
And I love the way...
I was going to say, not just, destroying the other people's benefit, but actually benefiting, because trade is a beneficial transaction for both parties.
No, I didn't think that I said that they were destroying the other. They were having to maximize their own benefit while allowing the other person to maximize their benefit.
Yes.
And now we're having to identify and define what it means when everybody wins. How is that seen, and what is an equitable arrangement there? And think of the first farmers who had a surplus of wheat, and they had to somehow store it, they had to measure it, all these things. And on the off season, what do you think they were thinking about? We got to figure a way to protect our grain, one, so it lasts through the year, and we have enough surplus to trade. How do you trade? Now we give rise to currency, and how a currency develops. So over and over, and I like the whole concept of a civilization contract. I think I like that concept. And where everybody wins, there has to be, and we're going to do a podcast in a couple weeks, there has to be a way for competition and cooperation both. And that's has been always the growing edge of civilizations meeting each other, is how we develop that and how we protect. I know that China and Japan, the silkworm, they did not want the West getting the silkworm because that would mess up them. Why would they give us the source of that? So the way that the Silk Road is actually called because of so much fabric that went through there and textiles went through down that road. Over and over, these connecting routes of civilization have been giving rise to new orders of civilization. And one thing we know is that civilizations have a central government that assures law and order, sometimes by force, sometimes not. And if there's a global civilization, there will have to be some kind of central government, and it ain't going to be the UN. I look at Star Wars and those big councils of planets and go, holy crap, is that where we're headed? Which is not good. So civilization, built-in problems, but also built-in probability for solutions. And part of what civilization has been doing, again, the word civil comes from civitas, which is the same word for city. It's where people get together who are different. They have to live together, and they have to find ways of living together. And that's part of the fundamental problems of being in the human family. How do we do that? So civilization, I think, gives us a pretty good clue and cue into how we do it, which is we recognize the validity of all the perspectives, and we see that everybody has something to give, and we recognize that not everybody is the same. There's some quiet there. So we're actually getting close here. So civilization. Yeehaw. Final comments?
Let me give
me your final comment, Bob.
Well, I think for civilization to exist, there has to be a baseline. And we've talked about justice, we've talked about equity and so forth. And the majority of people in a civilization have to feel like they're benefiting from it, or it's going to fall. And that's what's happened over the millennia. There have been civilizations that existed before the written word, that they were able to build things like Stonehenge. They were able to build things like the Mayan pyramids. And for one reason or another, there wasn't that baseline. America, or the United States, has the baseline of the Bill of Rights, where everyone is supposed to be able to have certain freedoms. The UN has the Charter of Human Rights that they try and promulgate around the world. And it's those baselines that we have to constantly go back to and constantly reinforce in order for civilization to be maintained.
Amen. Marianne, final comments?
I kind of go back to the whole idea of the agreed upon rules. And when we're becoming so multicultural that those rules that many of us have depended on seem to be falling away. And I think what's happening and with civilization, we coming to the place of our interdependence is a good thing. And the idea that everybody wins, that there is a possibility of that, because part of what we've learned before was that wasn't possible, that there always had to be a winner and a loser. And the idea just to start to bring that into our civilization of the future. What do we want it to look like? Collectively, we're figuring it out, and we're seeing all of these different things happening. And honestly, when you talk about being optimistic about what's coming, I've talked to some young people, and they are amazing with where they're going, with what they see as the future. And so I think just we are negotiating our differences. I think you said that earlier, Red Hawk, and it's kind of a messy process, but we're getting there, and we're going to find some new rules in order to live together, or we're going to destroy ourselves. And so I'm on the side of let's figure it out.
Amen. Amen. And you know, part of the whole thing with human beings is we do pay attention. Before civilization, really, it was right at that junction, actually. The days kept getting shorter and shorter, and the people thought, oh my God, the days are just going to disappear, and that's going to be the end. And so they started gathering evergreen because it didn't lose its leaves and die. They started making big fires using these huge, huge logs called Yule logs over and over. Call back the light. And somewhere around December 21st, 22nd, the light started coming back. Started coming back. And that's what Christmas is. That's what Hanukkah is. That's what the solstice is. We hope you'll join us in our next podcast when we talk about, not just talk about, but again, I'm in a celebratory mood. Celebrate the solstice. The Earth's at 22 degrees. It leans into the sun. It leans away from the sun. And it creates these amazing, amazing patterns. Welcome to the solstice. Welcome to winter. My friends, God's peace.